Let me be straight with you right now. I wasn't even planning to talk about Cleveland this week. My board was packed, I had 3 other teams I was working through, and honestly, Cleveland has spent so much oxygen on the Deshaun Watson saga and all the surrounding noise that I'd mentally filed them under. We'll get there eventually. But then I sat down with the footage from their recent minicamp, and I stopped, rewound, watched it again. Then I did something I almost never do. I cleared everything else off my screen and spent the next 2 hours on nothing but Cleveland, because something in that footage felt genuinely different from the packaged content teams push out to feed their media cycle. Something felt real. And by the time I finished, I was sitting with a thought I wasn't fully prepared for. The most significant story in the AFC North right now might not be in Baltimore or Cincinnati. It might be in Berea, Ohio, being assembled 1 rep at a time. I want to get into everything I saw. But first, let me give you the proper frame, because this matters. Minicamp is helmets and shorts, no pass rush, no defensive back clawing for a roster spot with the desperate energy that authentically tests a receiver's concentration at the top of his route. Nobody is truly fighting for their life the way they will be in August. If someone tries to hand you definitive conclusions from 3 days of controlled walkthroughs, be skeptical of what they're selling. But here's what these sessions genuinely reveal. And this is the part most people miss. They expose the private preparation, the months of invisible work that happened in empty facilities before anyone turned on a camera. That kind of preparation announces itself immediately on day 1, loudly and undeniably, whether the player intended to advertise it or not. The readiness shows, always. Let me start with Denzel Boston, because I think he is being dramatically undervalued in the national conversation. Not by a small margin, by the kind of gap between what I watched on film and what most coverage is giving him that genuinely bothers me. The physical profile announces itself the moment the footage starts. Long, big, filling the outside receiver position with a presence and authority that this Cleveland offense has been quietly missing for years. Quietly enough that most people have stopped registering it as a structural problem. The second the clip circulated, the Josh Gordon comparisons flooded in, and I understand the instinct. A boundary receiver who physically imposes himself on a route, who earns genuine coverage commitment, rather than the soft shade corners afford to a receiver they don't truly respect, who forces defensive coordinators into allocation decisions, rather than simply reacting to what the offense presents. That kind of player represents a specific absence that has been placing a quiet ceiling on this offense, and Boston's physical profile addresses it in a way that deserves clear, unqualified acknowledgement. But the physical description is not the real story, and I refuse to let it get reduced to that. The routes are the story, and the routes are being discussed in a single evaluative sentence when they deserve serious, extended attention. Boston was not winning those minicamp drills on size alone. He wasn't simply using his frame to push defensive backs around and manufacture separation through physical advantage. What he was demonstrating, at an early stage where his technical refinement is still being assembled, was genuine route intelligence, mature route intelligence. He was establishing positional leverage before his breaks, not scrambling for it afterward. He was setting tendencies in his release stems early in a drill and executing cuts that directly contradicted what he'd been showing coverage all session. He was processing pre-snap reads and en-route adjustments in a way that separates receivers who truly understand what this position demands professionally from athletic profiles who are still discovering what the position fundamentally is. That level of route sophistication does not walk into a professional evaluation from nowhere. It doesn't get installed by a coaching staff over 3 days of walkthroughs. That kind of foundation gets built through months of deliberate solitary work, empty facilities, private coaching, rep after rep where nothing is being filmed, and the only force driving the labor is the player's own reckoning with what the opportunity requires. Boston walked into Cleveland minicamp with that work already completed. Visible in the way that genuinely prepared players are always visible on day 1, because preparation that thorough cannot hide itself. For Shedeur Sanders, the implications are concrete. The most persistent structural constraint on this offense has been the absence of a boundary receiver who earns enough defensive respect to force genuine coverage commitment on the perimeter. Boston's combination of physical presence and developing route sophistication, alongside Shedeur's documented precision, creates a coverage problem this offense simply has not been capable of generating in years. That matters in play calling freedom, in third down conversion rates, in what becomes possible in the fourth quarter when every coordinator in the league currently knows exactly where the ball is going. Now, Concepcion, and I'm giving you both sides honestly, because the comfortable version and the accurate version of this evaluation diverge enough that you need the full picture. The drops were a real problem. I'm not softening that by hiding behind minicamp context, because drops in professional football are not purely statistical events. They are psychological events with downstream operational consequences that extend far beyond the individual play. Every time a receiver fails to secure a catchable ball, it deposits friction into his relationship with his quarterback. Friction that doesn't disappear between snaps, that quietly influences play calling in ways that never appear explicitly in a game plan document. Over time, it erodes the operational trust a quarterback must carry in a receiver to commit to him when coverage is tight and the game is on the line. Concepcion's hands need to arrive at a significantly more reliable standard. That is where he is. That is the primary developmental challenge sitting in front of him. But reducing the entire Concepcion assessment to that conversation is its own analytical failure, and I'm not doing it. The route tape demands a separate accounting. The way he was already processing his releases off the line, the movement concepts applied through the stems of his routes before his breaks, the quickness he was generating at the top of his cuts, real quickness, not telegraphed. There was a touchdown rep where he created separation through correct route execution and precise timing, not by out-athleting anyone, but by making the route concept function exactly the way it was designed to function against the coverage he was reading pre-snap. That distinction is enormous when projecting a player's ceiling. Getting open because a route worked correctly is a fundamentally different statement than getting open because you ran faster than the man covering you. The first tells you the football intelligence is developing at a real pace. The second just tells you the player is athletic. What Concepcion showed fell clearly in the first category. His feet are already doing things that give the coaching staff genuine developmental material. The hands need to match everything else, but work built on a legitimate technical foundation is a meaningfully different situation from drops sitting on top of nothing. Let me address Terran Green directly, because I can feel where certain corners of this coverage want to take his minicamp moments before that narrative builds momentum it hasn't earned. The arm talent is real. The mobility creates a dimension traditional pocket passers structurally cannot provide. The physical presence he brought to those early sessions generated genuine excitement that deserves honest acknowledgement. But alongside all of that, because real evaluation requires holding both things at once, the mechanical release carries a length and a looseness that will need sustained refinement to hold up against live professional pass rush. He overthrew a tight end. He sailed throws past intended targets in separate sequences. None of that is surprising. Green was a 6th-round pick specifically because the ceiling exists on an extended developmental timeline, and his current floor is precisely where 6th-round developmental quarterbacks tend to sit at the start of their professional lives. A description, not a condemnation. But I need to be completely direct because I can feel where this is being pushed, and it needs addressing without softening. An encouraging rep in a no-contact walkthrough does not reopen any meaningful conversation about the Cleveland Browns starting quarterback position. Not slightly, not in any direction. Green's physical tools are genuinely interesting, and his long-term development as a backup may produce something worth tracking. But a 6th-round developmental quarterback still translating raw gifts into consistent professional mechanics is not entering any legitimate conversation about the starting role on a franchise that has embedded its entire organizational identity into a different quarterback. Shedeur Sanders is who Cleveland is building toward. That conclusion is encoded in every significant resource decision this franchise has made this offseason. One promising rep in a controlled, padless environment does not alter a single element of that architecture. Now here is where I want to spend the most time, because I genuinely believe this is the biggest story coming out of Cleveland minicamp and the one least likely to receive serious attention. Stop looking at the individual pieces and look at the organizational logic connecting them. Boston directly addresses the boundary receiver absence that has quietly capped this offense for years, not as a projection, but as an identifiable profile arriving with preparation work already visible on film. Concepcion's movement qualities create coverage allocation problems in the intermediate zones that generate space precisely where Shedeur has demonstrated the most precision and comfort. The rebuilt offensive line represents hundreds of millions of dollars invested toward building the protective infrastructure a franchise quarterback needs to operate at his ceiling rather than the compromised survival level and unstable front five forces on him. These are not generic acquisitions filling generic holes. These are deliberate investments in an offensive vision architected around a specific quarterback's particular skill set, then resourced with the seriousness of an organization that genuinely believes in what it is constructing. That is what intentional franchise building looks like from the inside. It is a completely different category from the transactional roster management that teams trapped in perpetual transition tend to produce. Pieces collected opportunistically with the hope that the scheme somehow makes them coherent. The difference is visible in the coherence of the decisions when you examine them together rather than individually. Cleveland right now does not look like a team reacting. It looks like a team executing a plan drawn up long before minicamp week. What the competitive atmosphere inside this minicamp also reveals is the internal culture being actively shaped inside that facility. The earliest days of a rookie minicamp efficiently expose one specific thing: who arrived with their preparation already done and who showed up expecting to figure things out in real time while the evaluation was already running. Boston's route intelligence on day one was not installed in 3 days of walkthroughs. It was built over months of solitary work in empty facilities, driven entirely by his own reckoning with what this moment required. Concepcion's movement sophistication through his release patterns tells the same story about the same fundamental choice. These are players who treated the offseason before their first professional evaluation as a genuine competitive opportunity rather than a waiting period. And that choice is immediately visible to anyone who has watched enough football to recognize the difference between players who arrived prepared and talented players who arrived banking on instinct to carry them through the first impression. The Watson narrative has consumed its own oxygen for long enough. The Diggs speculation resurfaces on a media schedule genuinely disconnected from any actual evidence. The Terran Green storyline certain corners want to elevate into something substantial is not supported by what the evaluation actually shows. Those are not the real stories coming out of Cleveland. The real story is on that practice field, being written one rep at a time by receivers who showed up with their preparation already visible in their technique, by rookies competing with the urgency of players who understand what is at stake, and by a coaching staff assembling an offense with deliberate intention around a quarterback's specific abilities. Not another transitional year, not another survival cycle, while the actual opportunity stays just out of reach. A foundation being built deliberately, specifically, and with the investment decisions to back the stated intention up. The assembly is further along and moving faster than most of the national conversation has caught up to yet. Something real is being built there. Pay attention. Because by the time October comes and people are scrambling to explain what they're watching, the answer will already be in these minicamp clips that most people scrolled past without stopping.